So we're in chapter 9 of your United States history in section 3. And we're going on talking about Thomas Jefferson's presidency, his second term. Remember, he's the third president of the United States. We're going to go in and talk about some things that happened. His first term was, everyone was pretty happy with what he was doing, and people were getting along pretty good. But his second term, there were some big major happenings that were caused problems to the point where he didn't want to really be president for another term after that. So we're going to talk about the Burr conspiracy. Aaron Burr, remember I told you he was pretty much of a slime dog. So on to the Barbary pirates, who were they? And on to the trouble with Britain and France. Remember, Britain and France are at war, and how can we stay neutral? We're going to go on to the Chesapeake affair. Chesapeake is a boat, a ship that was attacked. And on to the Embargo Act, which is one of the worst acts that President Jefferson could ever do. And after the Embargo Act, the president did not want to be president anymore because it basically caused a lot of problems with people because of financially everybody were going broke because of this Embargo Act. So let's find out more about these things. Excuse me. Thomas Jefferson's popularity. So, in spite of the purchase of Louisiana, there was an increased national debt. The national debt had increased, but everyone actually, in taking care of the national debt, because of the purchase, it was extremely popular, and they were willing to pay the debt because they really liked his purchase of Louisiana. And like I said, he was extremely popular at the time. His first term gave the people of the United States a general contentment. Everybody was pretty content. In 1804, he easily won the election over Charles C. Pinckney again. Remember that he ran for president a few times, Charles C. Pinckney, the Federalist, and he didn't win. The Federalists were losing power, and everyone was looking and liking Thomas Jefferson. But his second term would be filled with different controversies and turmoil. So here's the election, here's Pinckney, and here's Jefferson. This is Aaron Burr, will be his vice president, and pretty much slime dog, but anyway. And there's Jefferson. The Burr conspiracy. What happened with Aaron Burr? Why do I call him a slime dog? Well, Aaron Burr lived 1756 to 1836, and he was Jefferson's vice president. Remember, Aaron Burr, the first time Aaron Burr actually by one vote lost the presidency, by just one vote from Alexander Hamilton in the House of Representatives. So he was very bitter, and as vice president, he didn't feel like he was doing anything. He wanted to be president. So, because he had tied with Thomas Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton had given support for Thomas Jefferson instead of Burr. So basically, Alexander Hamilton knew that Thomas Jefferson had more integrity than Aaron Burr. But anyway, Burr became extremely unpopular with the Republicans, and even the Federalists hated Aaron Burr. Why? We'll find out. While he was vice president, he ran for governor of New York. But he lost that again because Alexander Hamilton was basically involved in the government of New York. Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr were both from New York. In fact, they knew each other since they were like 19 years old. So, and Aaron Burr was very jealous of Alexander Hamilton, because Alexander Hamilton was basically like a son to George Washington. So, but Burr had devised a conspiracy against Hamilton, causing the death of Hamilton's son. I won't get into all of that. And so Burr ended up calling a duel with Alexander Hamilton. Duels were legal back then, and there was a duel without witnesses. And so he ended up a duel with Alexander Hamilton and killing Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton was extremely popular, and for him to shoot Alexander Hamilton, everyone looked at him as a murderer, But because it was a duel, they didn't prosecute him. So Burr's new conspiracy. So now he has another conspiracy. Alexander Hamilton is dead, so he's not worried about him. But now he intends to create a whole Western empire out of the new Louisiana territory and part of Mexico. So he's thinking, man, this new territory out there, I'm going to go out there and talk to the governor there, and I'm going to get in charge of all this, and I'm going to end up having my own empire. And then I'll go away from the United States and have a new country. So he has a big head, doesn't he? So in Mississippi, he said, would be the center, and my capital will be at New Orleans. So he would be the leader, or he would be the dictator. He thought, I could be a dictator of this new area now. So in 1806, he conferred with other conspirators to be together with them, and he contacted General Wilkinson. General Wilkinson, here is a picture of him, was the governor of Louisiana Territory, and he told him that he wanted him to help him raise a small army in Kentucky to take over this area from the United States. So he said, basically, I want to take over this whole area from the United States, and you can be one of my generals, and I'm going to put together this whole new army. Okay, so that's really being treasonous, right? So Wilkinson was listening to him, and then he betrayed him and went to the federal authorities and said, did you know that our vice president, Aaron Burr, is wanting to raise an army to go against the United States? That's a big deal, isn't it? So Aaron Burr was arrested, and then he was tried. He was arrested in Mississippi. He was sent to Richmond, Virginia, and he was tried in a federal court under the Chief Justice John Marshall, who was the Supreme Court judge, right? And though he didn't have enough evidence to convict him of treason, even though he had the testimony there, he hadn't really got together and put forth an army, and he hadn't attacked the United States. So he wasn't tried of treason and killed, which he could have been at that time. Instead, he was let go. But he was taken out of his position as vice president, and so he decided to go to Europe. He immigrated to Europe, where he unsuccessfully tried to gather another army. So in Europe, he went over there to get together another army. He wanted to come back and still get that Louisiana territory, right? So so then in the midst of all that, trying to do that, he basically in Europe, people did not want to pay attention to him. They thought he was crazy, I guess. I don't know. But it was unsuccessful there to gather the army. So he came back to New York City. That was his city. That he wanted to be governor, but nobody would pay attention to him much. And so he led kind of a secret life in New York City, and he died in 1836. So basically, Aaron Burr was pretty much of a slime dog. So a vice president of the United States, and of course, Thomas Jefferson did not want anything to do with him. Aaron Burr had become his vice president, not because he wanted Thomas Jefferson wanted him to be his vice president. Thomas Jefferson could not stand him, and especially because of his duel with Alexander Hamilton, because Alexander Hamilton had supported and claimed that Thomas Jefferson had integrity, where Aaron Burr had none. So that was a conspiracy that Thomas Jefferson had to deal with. In the meantime, here's another thing going on. They had these Barbary pirates. Well, what's that? Well, under Washington and Adams, the United States was forced to pay annual tributes to the Muslim Berbers in the Mediterranean area and in Africa. So when our ships went over there, like in London, like England, like the English had to do, that were coming through London, they had to pay fees to these Muslims for their safety, or else the pirates would attack them. These were called Barbary pirates, and they were off the coast of Africa and the Mediterranean Sea. So Washington and Adams, they just paid some money to them so that they wouldn't attack our ships. And the Berbers lived in these Muslim countries. And so basically, they attacked our American ships and they stole their cargoes if we didn't pay them. They had also would kidnap our crews for ransom money. So they kidnap the crews of our ships and then they'd ransom and say we need to pay for them. And Washington and Adams did this. But this whole thing for Thomas Jefferson really repulsed him. He said, I'm not going to pay some pirates. We're not going to pay these Barbary pirates anything. So then they knew Thomas Jefferson was not going to pay the Muslim nation of Tripoli. And so in 1801, the ruler of Tripoli decided that they would declare war on the United States because they asked Thomas Jefferson for the money. And Tripoli says, we want money so that we can protect you from our Barbary pirates. It was a big thing for them so they could get money from us, right? And Jefferson refuses. I'm not giving you any money. Tripoli declares war on America between 1801 to 1805. We don't really hear much about this war, do we? Well, Tripoli wanted this tribute money, and the declaration of war went on, and when Jefferson wouldn't provide it, so Jefferson sent warships, and one of the biggest heroes at that time was Stephen Decatur. And he went through and went to Tripoli, and he attacked these pirates and such. Well, what happened? There was a nighttime attack. Decatur sneaked into Tripoli harbor, and see, they had an American ship there that they were on, and they were using an American ship. So he had that American ship burned. He set it on fire. They had captured it and he set it on fire. And then while they were running around and wondering what was going on with the ship, he bombed their coast of Tripoli. And then in Tripoli, the Muslim country of Tripoli surrendered in peace in 1805 to us and didn't want to fight us anymore for our money to get that, basically giving them tributes to protect them anymore. And so we won the war of Tripoli. And that was all in the time of Thomas Jefferson, because he had the integrity saying, we don't need to be paying pirates money to protect us. So, but going on, more trouble would happen. The trouble with Britain and France. You see, Britain and France were at war. We have Napoleon now with a Napoleon War. So the United States was caught in the middle. Napoleon was the French dictator at that time. And basically, in between Napoleon, the French wars in Great Britain, we had to figure out what we were doing. And of course, Thomas Jefferson wanted to stay neutral because he had always been behind France, but he knew that Napoleon was very erotic and very much of a dictator. So each of France and Great Britain, England, were blockading our ports and limiting our trade. And so Napoleon, he puts forth this Berlin Decree. So he says in 1806, the Berlin Decree prohibited trade by the allies of France with Great Britain. Basically, the French were saying, we are going to prohibit trade with you because if you're going to be a friend of Great Britain, we're not. So the French decree put forth, and then the Orders of Council was the English decree. The British decree prohibited neutral ships to enter. We were neutral to enter any of Napoleon's ports. They had to be inspected and pay fees to the British. So our ships, if our ships were going to France, they would search our ships and make us pay fees. So Britain was doing this while the French was doing just the opposite and attacking our ships too. So we were right in the middle. So the Milan Decree was another one Napoleon made, and basically extended the Berlin Decree to neutral nations, saying any neutral nation that says they're neutral, if they're in our way coming and we see them have an alliance with Great Britain, we can attack them. So it was not easy to be neutral in this war. Neutrality was virtually impossible, it says. American ships were vulnerable to seizure and attacked by both sides. But the war increased, and the value of American exports, Americans were still exporting things to both, England and France. So Americans continued to trade with both sides. 1/3 of the American ships reached their destinations, but they had a lot of profits because both the English and French needed supplies from America, so they were profiting. So exportation did peak during this time. Between 1803 and 1807 here, 500 ships from America were seized by the British, and 300 ships from America were captured by the French. Can you imagine that? 500 of our ships were seized by the British. They took them. And 300 of our ships were seized by the French. So now we're losing our ships, right? America demanded that something happen. What were we to do? This seizing of our ships had to stop. But the worst part of it was what the British were doing. Because the British were they did the impressment of Americans in the Royal Navy. So they would claim to be searching a ship for British deserters on American ships. They'd stop American ships and we need to come in and we need to search your ship because you have deserters on there. You have some British soldiers that are deserting. And then they would kidnap the men and say, this one, this one, this one, this one. And they would say, we're American citizens. And they said, no, you're not. And they'd take our seamen, take our men off the ships, all the sailors would off the ships they wanted. And then they would handcuff them and put them on their ships. And then they would use them to fight in the war on their ships. And this outraged America, saying, how dare they come and take our men, our boys, and take them and use them as slaves on their ships. The Chesapeake Affair was one of these. Chesapeake is a boat, a ship. So the British warship Leopard, named Leopard, stopped our ship off the coast of Virginia to search for deserters. And the captain of the Chesapeake, which is American, they're right by Virginia. We're not out there next to England or anything, but by Virginia, just a second, let me get this, there we go. They're stopping us on our borders, and they stopped, and the captain of the Chesapeake denied. He said, we don't have any deserters, we're in America. And he refused to let them come aboard and search and take some of their men. So the Leopard opened fire on the Chesapeake, on our boat. So the English boat fired on us, and the British came in. Basically, the Chesapeake was unprepared. It was a naval ship, but it was not prepared for war. It had no guns or whatever that they needed, and so they had to surrender, and the British came on and seized 4 crewmen, but only one of them was even British, and he wasn't a deserter. But they wounded 3 Americans. Oh no, they killed 3 Americans were dead, and they wounded 18 Americans. So 18 were wounded, and 3 Americans were killed on the Chesapeake. And so when the Chesapeake returned and the Americans there, through all the states there, it went like, did you know that the Leopard, the British ship, fired on our Chesapeake naval ship for no good reason, killing 3 and wounding 18, and took 4 of our crewmen, and only one of them was British? So they were all upset. It was a violation. Impressment of our sailors, our seamen, was a violation, international violation. The impressment of American seamen violated the international law. And it was taking these American citizens from an American naval vessel was an act of war. If they came into our naval vessels and just took our sailors on the vessel, and our military, that was declaring war on us. So Britain, right away, they thought, oh no, we don't need to get in a war with the United States. We're already at war at France. So they paid a monetary fund to the United States, but they refused to even discuss the issue. They said, they didn't discuss about impressment. They wouldn't even talk about it. They just gave us some money and said, be quiet. So the American citizens then called for war and said, if they're going to take our sailors, we need to go to a war. Well, Congress, under Thomas Jefferson, remember Thomas Jefferson had reduced the size of the Army and the Navy. So we couldn't go to war. We didn't have a big Army or Navy. We couldn't fight France or Britain at that time. So America was very unprepared to defend herself in any kind of war, and Jefferson knew that too. So he thought the dumbest thing that Jefferson ever did was this. Why? It's called the Embargo Act. It was not a good thought. He thought this scheme that he put together for Great Britain and France is that he would recognize American neutral rights without causing war, maybe by what? Depriving them of American goods and forcing them to cooperate. The Embargo Act did this so Americans could not carry their goods anywhere to any nations. So it cut off all American trade. He said, Americans cannot trade with anybody. A bad deal. This backfired on America because Americans were trading with other nations, and that's how they were making a lot of their money, and a lot of the jobs were for trade. So now, as you see, the Embargo Act was the dumbest thing that Jefferson ever did, and in New England, they thought, what is he doing? And everyone thought, what is this going to do? The failure of the Embargo Act, it failed. This act would be worse than the original problem. For 15 months, there's a failure to bring either France or Britain. They could care less. They were at war. And it didn't bring them to any terms at all. And it nearly destroyed the American economy with no foreign trade at all. It pulled the base out of our economy, and our exports fell to less than 10%. And our import duties from allies fell less than 50%. So the American ships could no longer sail to foreign ports. Our ports were closed. The Embargo Act closed our ports. They were closed to British ships. It banned all trade. Not a good idea, as you see here in these pictures. The American public opposed the Embargo Act. Many merchants went bankrupt. Dock workers, people that worked on the docks, lost their job. Seamen that went on those ships lost their job. Shipbuilders lost their job. They were out of work. Farmers lost their market for their crops. And many ships just started smuggling goods instead along the Canadian border. We couldn't even bring anything into Canada, So the grand juries did not indict violators. So if they smuggled things, people said, let them smuggle. I mean, brother, everyone's poor. They don't have any food to eat, they weren't prosecuted. So the northeastern United States wanted to succeed from the Union because they thought, what is Jefferson doing? So the Federalists that were left were up in the Northeast, and they could not even trade with Canada. So into Canada. So they were going to say, this is going to cause us to go totally bankrupt, and we're going to end up in the poorhouse. So Jefferson's last week in office, he decided he better repeal the Embargo Act, the dumbest thing that he did, right? Which he did. And he decided he was sick and tired of being in politics, and he decided to not go for another term. Well, of course, at that time, he already had 2 terms, but he decided to support his prodigy. They were close friends, and also in politics, they had the same political, Republican political stand, and that would be James Madison. James Madison was the signer of the Constitution. So let's stop there.